Your paycheck may seem like a taboo topic, but talking things through may be the key factor your organization needs in order to be equitable. Welcome to another episode of Diversifying Your Technical Workforce, a technically learning series produced as a part of the Most Diverse Tech Hub initiative and supported by the City of Philadelphia's Department of Commerce. I'm Deborah Sharmaluz, a creator, curator, and organizer who will be your host for this 10-part course with the straightforward goal to give you specific tactics for diversifying your workforce. This learning series you're watching now is a condensed and edited version of that workshop series. Each of our episodes will feature a different esteemed national expert. In this video, we're focused on pay transparency. Let's see what our speakers have to say about it.
We want to give you a little flavor of this today and some starting places, but of course, this is not going to be exhaustive. This will probably be a months or years long process in your organization. Before we go into some of the specific steps and questions around this, I will share a little bit about the process that we took at Allaview, which Crystal was actually a large part of because she was our director of talent for several years. We initially started doing this work among the executive leadership team. So we started doing research around norming job titles, norming salaries across those titles, having conversation about what things look like from department to department, what things look like in terms of market rate and where we wanted to be in terms of competitiveness with the tech market, with the Baltimore market, which are often very different markets for compensation. And we really started sort of piloting what we wanted to do behind the scenes. I will say one thing that Crystal helped call out for us really early on that was a really pivotal point of doing this work was the importance of norming job titles. The tech industry in particular has this very weird habit of inventing weird creative names for jobs that don't mean anything and are very hard to benchmark. I now think that's somewhat intentional. But if you've ever seen the we need a data ninja or like a code rock star, that's not a job. That's not something you can easily benchmark or compare or normalize. So one of the first things that we did was actually start to think about how we could level and norm titles across departments so that a senior title in the product department meant the same thing as a senior title in design or sales or customer success. And on the one hand, it's very boring, right? Our job titles became very boring. But on the flip side, it's a lot easier for both candidates and your organization to benchmark what those jobs actually are and what they mean in the labor market. So if I personally want to call that out as something that was really important in the early stages for us to think about what those job titles actually were and how we could map them to things that were easy to search, compare, and benchmark in the labor market and in databases about compensation.
Coming from Allaview, which is a young, new company when I worked there, and moving into Urban Teachers, which is more of a middle stage, I'd say getting out of infancy and toddlerhood into, teenage development of an organization. I entered a space where surprisingly there was very little title consistency. There was little job description consistency, even of those ultimately doing the same work. And there was a ton of opaqueness around pay, no existing structure at all. Basically, a hiring manager would maybe check LinkedIn, maybe not, and or Glassdoor and find what they thought was comparative in the market by looking at job title, and not even doing that second double click of job duties, which is even more important, and then placing sort of a rec out there. And so I entered an organization that had tremendous pay disparity. And we really had to start from the ground, and maybe even below zero, because when COVID hit, we also had to do salary reductions. So if you compound reductions on top of pay opaqueness and inequity, you get basically a really frustrated, upset, and righteously angry employee base. So for us, me understanding where our people were and why they were there, I knew that we needed to work with an outside partner in order for folks to even trust the process. And learned a lot from that external partner, not hiding the ball. We worked with Agility, known for really considering equitable pay practices, to help us think through how we would move from a total free-for-all, frankly, into a pay structure. And some of the things that we had to grapple with were things like specificity versus universality. How like nitty gritty do we get in that first iteration? Is each department sort of having its own decision trees around what relevant experience meant? Or are we going to be a little bit more uniform? Internal equity versus market competition. We know that if you are going just based on the market, you're inheriting all of the bias in market. And specifically around jobs, we know that when mostly women are within a field, that sort of field takes a pay hit in terms of how well that field is valued. So we really wanted to, but if when you're hiring, you are competing with other folks hiring. So we had to figure out a comfortable space between internal equity and market competition. That was another sort of philosophical tension that we had.
A lot of the part of this process is defining your philosophies around compensation structure, because there's no one right way to build a compensation structure. There's plenty of really wrong ways, but there really isn't a one size fits all approach. And some of it does have to do with where you are as an organization, what industry you're in, how much external funding or not you have, where you might have a wider range of opportunities, whether your organization has non-cash compensation as part of your model, like extra benefits or equity. So having these conversations as a leadership team in terms of what are, regardless of what some of your original mindsets might have been around compensation, what's sort of your ideal philosophy and framework, and that will help guide the other steps in your process when it comes to the more tactical components.
I wanted to also just like call quick attention to two parts: market, so where you fall in terms of market competitiveness. Urban Teachers targeted the 50th percentile. Prior to our compensation study, we were around the 40th percentile. And this was important to me to get to the 50th or above, because we philosophically decided against any negotiation at all. And it's a stance that I like to preach about. It is widely understood that negotiation causes tremendous harm for specifically women and people of color, and especially women of color. And so um, we do away with it, and it becomes much easier to do away with negotiation when you're paying towards the top of the market or at least at market. In terms of individual versus team, some organizations prefer individual performance to have a part in particularly how folks move through and advance through a pay structure. And others prefer a team model, how a team performs, to sort of as a criteria for how folks advance through a structure. So these are just priorities and things to really grapple with philosophically. I encourage you not to just do this on your own and plot on your own spectrum or line graph, but have these critical and crucial conversations with others. It will unearth, again, more of those mindsets and more of the thinking that you'll need to get on the table in order to build a structure that um, makes sense.
I also want to double click on something that you mentioned, Crystal, about the internal equity versus market competition. So as you are thinking, and this kind of goes with that market percentile piece, there's some overlap in this conversation. Part of your equity audit and your compensation audit might be seeing where your staff is today compared to market rates. But I cannot stress enough that there are deep inequities baked into those market rates. And I think it is very important to remember that market rate does not mean gold standard. And so you will likely see that there are disparities in the market rates because we know that these pay equities persist. I know one justification that I've heard from people, or one defense against pay transparency, is if you're going to say the floor for this role is $60,000, but you get an applicant who's currently making 40 and says they really want to make 45. Well, a true capitalist would say, we're wasting $15,000 by offering them 60 when they would have taken 45. But an equitable compensation structure says, you were probably being dramatically underpaid for your skills at $40,000. We have independently decided that the responsibilities and accountability and experiences that we are looking for in this role is at least a $60,000 job. And to pay less than that is to exploit your labor force. And, look, I'm a startup founder. I know what it is like to have 2 weeks of money in the bank and to feel the pain of like, oh, we need to save every dollar. This is not the place to save the dollars. I promise you. You will sleep better at night. Your company will be healthier. Your employees will be happier. You will have more loyalty and trust and equity on your team if you do right by people and adhere to those structures in both directions. I don't think any of you became organizational leaders to intentionally screw over people and exploit them. And some of the results of this might make me feel like a bad person. You might be like, how did I let that happen? That was happening under my nose. I helped perpetuate pay inequity in my organization.
And the absolute worst thing you can do is try to rationalize what happened because you feel bad. So, really sitting with any weight that you feel as you kind of discover discrepancies and putting them down, put that weight down in as much as it helps you to look clear eyed to create a plan forward.
And I would say, especially if you are a white leader or a male leader and you find discrepancies between gender and race in your organization, you need to work really hard to decenter yourself and decenter your feelings from that process. These conversations cannot be about your employees making you feel better about it. So these are really tough conversations to have, they're tough facts and realities to confront, I really hope you do it. I hope you do the work. It's hard, but on the other side of this, having a more equitable and transparent organization is really worth it.
That's another episode of Technically's learning series on diversifying your workforce. Thank you to our supporter, the City of Philadelphia's Department of Commerce. If you want to dive deeper, all of the most diverse Tech Hub reporting and learning, including full recording of the workshops, can be found on Technically's website. Consider joining our public Slack channel and stay up to date by subscribing to our newsletter and following us on social media to see our upcoming programming. Once again, I'm Deborah Sharmaluse for Technically. See you next time.